Hey, my name's Sam. I'm currently a med student at Flinders. That's not normally how I introduce myself, but given we're talking about the Gamsat, I feel like it's relevant. The other thing to say too is that I'm not super comfortable sitting here filming myself talking about anything, let alone the Gamsat, but here we are, so forgive me for any awkwardness. The reason why I sort of am recording today is that I've done some Gamsat shooting in the past, but I only ever have time during the week for maybe two students max. But when I put out an ad to sort of find those two students, I get a lot more than two messages asking for tutoring. And so I figured the time that I sort of spend shooting, the first session is always the one that really adds the most value, and then after that, it's really just tidying up and going over specific questions. And so, if I can, I sort of thought if I can record what I say to people in the first session when I tutor, and then can make that available to anyone who wants it, and can put up with my voice for 45 minutes, then hopefully that benefit is sort of more accessible to everyone rather than just the few friends of friends that get referred my way. So a bit of background, I was a commerce and finance undergraduate. So I graduated from commerce in like 2020, I think. Worked for a couple of years in finance, and then decided that that was pretty boring and that I actually wanted to be a doctor. And so I started Gamsat um, on a background of a finance degree. And the last time I did biology was year 10. Last time I did physics and chem was probably year 12. And so reason for saying that is just that if you're in that non-science background sort of category, don't feel like that's going to exclude you from being successful in the GAMSAT, and we'll go into why that is in a little bit more detail. As I sort of said today, this is what I would be saying to someone when I tutor them for the first time. And so the first like 10 or so minutes, we'll just talk about the GAMSAT overall and sort of the high level, what it's looking for and how to approach it. And then towards the end, we'll do some more specific ways to practice and sort of go from there. And I would just say too, before we get into it, that this is my view. It's worked for me and it's worked for the people I tutor, but it's not necessarily the only way to do it. And if it doesn't work for you, then that's fine. If it does work for you, feel free to leave a comment saying that. But yeah, take everything with a grain of salt. This is just my view. So the first thing I like to do when I tutor anyone in the Gamsat is to start by looking at what the Gamsat actually is. And if you haven't read this one, it's pretty dry, but I'd encourage you to go through it cover to cover. You'll see here it's a 2023 one, and it's because that's the one that I marked up a few years ago, but I have double checked. It still looks like it's the same format. Caveat there being that if you're watching this, in the 2030s, then double check that it's still accurate. But really, there's a lot of waffle in this PDF, but there's a few things that are super important to get your head around too. And the first bit that's really important is to understand that the GAMSAT isn't a test of knowledge, it's a test of aptitude. And so what that means is it's not testing what you know and what you study before the test, it's testing how well you can apply things. New information in an unfamiliar context is effectively how aptitude is tested in the most basic way of explaining it. And why that's important is that a lot of people think the reason that they don't do so well, especially so well in section 3 when we sort of talk about it, is they think that they don't understand enough science. And so they'll go and read textbooks on, year 12 workbooks on chemistry or whatever, or they'll go and do, watch a lot of YouTube videos from certain tutors that make a lot of money teaching you how to do year 12 science, but that's not actually what the GAMSAT's looking for, and probably isn't what you're missing out on. The reason why I can say that so confidently is that, yeah, I didn't do biology. I don't know any chemistry. In first year of med, I had to rapidly learn what phospholipid bilayer was, and the way that chemistry works. I didn't know that stuff going into the GAMSAT, but what I did have a pretty strong basis in was sort of logic and reasoning, and ended up with a 94 in section 3. So I to this day don't know a heap of chemistry, and that didn't stop me getting into medicine. And so, yeah, just want to highlight that because it's a trap for spending a lot of time on something that isn't very high yield, to use a common overused phrase. All right, so test structure and content is the bit to really read, and you can see here that it's really trying to highlight what I've just said, which is that it's looking for you, or the purpose is to assess your ability to be analytical and think critically, and be a bit creative with issues and ideas, and then also being able to express those ideas and express those thoughts. And it's also, it doesn't necessarily say it here, but it's also, all of these things are in a fairly time pressured environment. And I guess that's trying to simulate, the future career in medicine, which is relatively time pressured. But yeah, what I'm really trying to highlight here is that even the Gamsat itself is telling you that it's really about this highlight bit here, reasoning in biological and physical sciences, reasoning in humanities and social sciences. So it's not saying this section tests you on science, it's saying it tests you on reasoning in the context of science. And so what that means is it will be scientific, sort of the topic will be science, and give you information in the context of science, and then it will ask you to make some reasoned decisions and pick an answer based on reasoning from that information. And so really what that's sort of telling us is that the information that you need to answer the question is in the stem for the questions. That wasn't always true. I've seen some Gamsat tests from the early 2000s, and it genuinely used to be a science test. And you really did have to go and do, up to first year uni chemistry and physics and biology. But that's no longer true, and it hasn't been for like probably a decade. It's, I started in 2022, and it was certainly a logic test then, and it's certainly been a logic test in 2023 and 2024. The thing about that though is that they really do try and hide and sort of frame the questions to make people think that they don't know the answer and that they can't work the answer out and that there's some assumed knowledge. And we'll go into how you can practice to get around that in the end when we go over how to specifically study for the Gamsat. But yeah, I just really want to highlight the point. There would often be in sessions where I'm tutoring people who are very smart and very good at science and weren't necessarily understanding what the Gamsat is looking for, where they would say, "Oh, I didn't know how to do acid-base reactions, so I couldn't answer this question." But really the acid-base sort of knowledge was implied and a distraction. But what you actually needed to do was just some, some addition from the question and go from there, for example. So I'm rambling on and I have a bad habit of doing that, but really can't stress enough the point that reasoning in is the bit that they're looking for, not the actual content. And as we said, there is that time pressure. So you've got exactly 2 minutes per question in section 3, and that includes time to read the stem, and you've got exactly sort of 1.6 minutes per question in section 1. And so, you've got to move pretty quickly. So if we go then specifically to section 1, and the way that we're going to prepare for section 1 and section 3 are going to be very similar. Section 2 is obviously a little bit different, but we will get to that. So what we're looking for in section 1 is this interpretation and understanding of ideas of the people that are writing the texts. So you'll get a passage, you'll get some text, it'll be a cartoon or something like that, and then you will have to try and put yourself into the mind of the person that created that to answer the questions. You don't necessarily have to understand Shakespeare and have read, War and Peace and all of these old books. I never have, and did fairly well. But what you have to do is be able to pick from 4 or 5 options in a multiple choice question, which answer is the most likely to be correct. And the skill that they're looking for in that is, can you put yourself into the position of the person that's written a text and tell what they were trying to articulate to you or convey to you. And so we'll go over how that can sort of work when we get to the specifics, but definitely have a read of these pages. So, questions that are sort of trying to dig out your sort of reasoning in the context of, what are people's ideas? What are their thoughts? What are their feelings? Why are they feeling that way? And what sort of can you logically conclude or critically think about the positions that they're sort of putting forward. So that's section 1. We'll jump onto section 3 next, just because it's similar to section 1. But here, what we have is this sort of table that's a little bit misleading, saying that 40% of the questions are chemistry, 40% of biology, 20% of physics, and that's probably true in that that's 40% are in the context of chemistry, 40% are in the context of biology, but 100% are testing reasoning. And there's, broad pillars of reasoning. So you can have, reasoning in unfamiliar contexts, qualitative reasoning, quantitative reasoning, that sort of thing. And so really the common sort of way to look at it is the physics, 20% are a bit more maths heavy and sort of quantitative reasoning. The biology is more, often it's the more graphical, like you'll get graphs, you'll get sort of diagrams and that sort of thing, and you'll have to deduce and sort of deductive reasoning. And then that 40% in chemistry is a lot of that sort of abstract reasoning and similar to sort of those, little IQ puzzles where there's random patterns and you've got to pick what comes next and etc. That's the sort of reasoning skill that typically the Gamsat questions in chemistry are looking for. So, those are the contexts and those are the domains that the questions are coming in. But that doesn't mean that you should be spending 40% of your time studying chemistry, 40% of your time studying biology, and 20% of your time studying physics. You should be spending 100% of your time studying, improving your reasoning and your logic in the context of science to prepare for the Gamsat. This is a really important paragraph to read because it tells you exactly what they're looking for. You'll see it says basic science concepts, and that's something that I'd agree with. Like you would want to know that matter comes in solids, liquids, and gases. But really, I would have sort of said that early high school level loose understanding of these things, knowing that stuff's made out of atoms and that there's an atom has electrons, is the kind of level of science that I knew going into it when I got a 94. And so that's what this is saying. So really then the skills that we're actually looking for are the ability to take information in a new context, a context that you're completely unfamiliar with, and then apply it. So it might be telling you, you might get an essay about some fish in Japan that converts oxygen at specific rates, and the colder the water, the slower the metabolism rate. And that's a genuine STEM that I got. But I don't know anything about fish in Japan or how they metabolize oxygen. I probably have a better guess of it now that I've done a couple of years of medicine, but I would have had no idea at the time I sat the Gamsat. The thing is, though, everything that I needed to know about it was in that STEM, and it was hard to find because it's not clear cut, because otherwise everyone would get 100, but it is in the STEM. So then we want to analyze and interpret data, which is hopefully something that everyone knows that the Gamsat is going to be asking you to do at some point. Discover relationships is a really good and important thing to specifically be looking for, because a lot of the times you're using inference and sort of inferring and deducing the answer based on implied meaning or sort of implied information from the STEM. So the answer will be in the STEM, but not in a clear-cut way. And so it's really that sort of being able to relate it to other information or taking a few different parts and relating them to each other. Translate knowledge from one form to another is sort of exactly what we're talking about. Formulate and apply hypotheses, make generalizations, and really what that's saying is that you have to be able to make educated guesses. And you won't always be able to work out the answer to the standard that you would want to be able to work out the answer in a Year 12 exam, or when you're writing an essay on the topic. You don't need to know with 100% certainty that one of the options in the multiple choice quiz is correct. You just need to sort of be confident that that answer is more correct than any of the other answers. And once you've reached that threshold, that's your answer that you're picking and you're moving on. So the Gamsat isn't about working out the answer until you've completely proven everything and would be ready to submit that to your Year 12 teacher as an assignment. It's about working out the answer to the sort of standard that you're happy that that's probably correct given the available options. And that's really the difference in skill that some of the people, especially like those, not to generalize, but those GPA 7 kids that like have never got anything wrong before and work really hard, but you have to be able to sort of let go of it and just go, okay, well, given these 4 options, I've got no idea what's going on, but it kind of has to be option C because A, B, and D make even less sense. That's good enough to get a good score and get into medicine. So, evaluating information and sort of like evidence, information, etc., is self-explanatory. Problem solving is really the entire game. But again, that sort of extrapolation, estimation, and whatnot is really important. We'll get onto it too, but the estimation in maths is also really important because you don't have to go and get your answer to 2 decimal points. You just have to be able to roughly do the maths so that it's clear which of the 4 answers. And often the answers will be, so far apart that the maths, as long as you round it to the nearest, whole number or 10 or 100, you'll have your answer. And then I've highlighted in a different color here, in red, this paragraph, and I've gone on about it enough, so hopefully you know why I'm saying it. But this just isn't, in my view, true anymore, and I think that was probably a hangover from years gone by. And then lastly, just this section 2 here, written communication. So this one's the easiest one to talk about because it's only looking for 2 things: the quality of the thinking about the topic, and then your ability to express it. So can you come up with good ideas, and then can you convey those good ideas well to other humans? That's really the 2 skills. You're not assessed on the correctness of your ideas, but don't do anything that would be like outrageously controversial because it just is not worth taking that risk. But that's what we were sort of saying. So there's 2 things that you're being assessed on: thought and content. So that's how good are your ideas, and then how good are you at expressing those ideas to other people. And at the very end, I'll talk about some ways to specifically prepare for section 2 as well. So the next thing I like to show people, and I sort of just got these off of Reddit, to be honest. And so the caveat with these is that they're self-reported scores, and so there's going to be a bias in the sample that people that score better are more likely to want to volunteer their score than people that don't score as well. And also there's no sort of you didn't have to prove it by uploading a score, you just filled out a survey. And so you can see here there's 2,500 people that over those years filled out this survey. And so it means that it's like just based on the volume, it's going to be relatively good. But I wouldn't get too caught up on these are the scores that you needed to get into medicine because that changes over time. Really what we're looking at here is the distribution of each section compared to the other distributions. So what we've got here is the scores of people in section 1 effectively, or the best representation of how the scores for section 1 are distributed. And what you'll see here is it's a really small curve in that, some of the low scores here start at 50, but the best scores are high 70s. And the middle is, what we're saying is it's a really dense distribution. For contrast, if we look at section 2, you can see that this is a far flatter curve. So more people are spread out, the scores, the tail end is lower, the other tail end is higher scores, and then it's flatter in the middle. Lastly, if we look at section 3, it's super flat compared to section 1. So just to really drill that point home. So these graphs graphs aren't that valuable in looking at, what people scored specifically to get into medicine, because they're out of date, and also, the individuals might have lied or whatnot. But what it does show you is that on average, it's a lot easier to move your Section 3 score, and the Section 3 scores are a lot more spread out. It's very hard to move your Section 1 score, and the Section 1 scores are very dense, and then Section 2 is sort of in the middle. The other thing that this shows you is that the scores aren't directly comparable between sections. So getting a 70 in Section 1 is far, 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 far harder than getting a 70 in Section 3. And the reason why you can say that with confidence is that, about maybe 20% of the numbers here are higher than 70, whereas, probably 45% are higher than 70 for Section 3. And so if you've sat the Gamsat 3 times, and your first Section 1 was 60, and then your next Section 1 was 62, and then your next Section 1 was 64, don't feel defeated in that moving your Section 1 score by 2 is the same as moving your Section 3 score by probably 5 or 6 based on these distributions. The other thing that's really important to know here for people looking at to apply for Sydney is that they often say that, the Section 3 isn't weighted at all, and it's 1.5 times Section 1 and 1 which isn't true. The way that works is that they rank you for each individual section, and then it's the average of the 3 ranks. And so what that means is that if you can get a 74 or a 75 in Section 1, you're going to rank in the top maybe 10% of people that sit it. Whereas that same score of 70 as a rank in Section 3 is probably going to put you at 300, because I'm sure 1,000 people apply for Sydney Uni. It's just important to know that the key points here are that Section 3 is really where you can move your scores up into really high numbers. Section 1 is really hard to get out of the 70s, and is quite a tight grouping, so don't feel sad if you can't move that number. And Section 2 is somewhere in the middle. All right. So that is that for looking at the sections, and I'm sort of going a bit over time compared to where I wanted to be. But now I want to jump into how to actually specifically prepare for the Gamsat. And we're going to start with Section 3 first, and then that Section 3 sort of way to prepare is the exact same way that you prepare for Section 1. And then we'll talk about Section 2 a little bit at the end of the sort of hour that I'll ramble on for. So the thing about preparing for the Gamsat is that if you do it passively, you won't really achieve a whole lot from the time that you spend practicing. And what I mean by that is that if you just sit there and do practice question after practice question after practice question, and then mark them and feel happy when you tick it and sad when you cross it, and then put that piece of paper down and start doing more practice questions, you really won't gain a whole lot out of either doing the practice questions or even just, that time isn't really being used that efficiently. Instead, what you want to do is you want to really actively engage with the practice questions that you've done to work out why you got them wrong, why you got them right, what you could have done differently, how you approached it, what you do next time, that sort of thing. And so as a general rule that I sort of say to the people that I tutor is, at least for every hour that you spend doing practice questions, you should be spending an hour going over answers and working out what was right and what was wrong and why. If not 2 hours, 2 to 1 sort of ratio. So more time should be spent going over the questions that you've done and reading through them and sort of working out what happened and how you approached it and how you should have approached it. More time should be spent doing that than should be spent doing actual practice questions. And this is how I would suggest achieving that. And what I mean is a table, something like this. So do it in Excel, or do it handwritten, or do it in a Word document. I've had people do it in all different sort of ways, but the underlying principle is the same, and it's having these sort of extra fields. So the first field is just writing the question number so that you know what question you're doing, and then you're going to have a field for your answer, and you're going to have a field for the correct answer. So those three are probably what everyone has whenever they do practice test. But the other thing that is super important for your learning and your getting better, this is a one extra column. If you only have one extra column, this is a column, is giving it a confidence score. So if you are super confident in your answer, when you sit there and you pick B and you know it's B for sure, you're going to give it a 5. If you look at the question, you've got no idea what's going on, and you just randomly guess C because you have literally no idea how to even work out, even reduce it down to out of 3, you don't know how to do that. You're going to pick 1. If it's somewhere in the middle, you think you've worked it out, but you're not really sure, you're going to, do a 3. If you're fairly sure you've worked it out, but, I just don't know if it's right, or, etc. 2 is like, I sort of thought maybe it's this, but I don't really know. So giving it a score for your confidence is going to be really important. So when you're sitting there doing your questions, you've got your little stem, you've read it through, the questions are now up. At this point, you're just doing A, B, or it's, C, B, but you do A and you're going to say, I was a 3 out of 5 confident for that. Question 2, I'm 100% sure I'm correct. Question 3, total guess. So as you do them, the next one I'm going to do, I'm picking D and I think that's a 4 for confidence. You're doing the confidence as you do the answer. Not because it helps you at the time, but because when you go back over it, that's going to be a really important part of it. The other things that you do, you don't know the correct answer yet. We'll hide that for now. Just pick: is it chem, is it bio, is it physics, or is it maths? And so you're just going to fill out what sort of what's context is the subject that the question was written in. And that's important because what I've often seen is that people will go and get, especially true for like the med sci grads with 7 GPAs that got a merit in year 12 biology, is that when there's a specific reasoning skill like reading a graph or something in a biology context, they get the question right. The exact same skill in, let's say, a physics question, they get the question wrong, and it's because they will then say, I don't know physics and I didn't know what it was asking. But it's the exact same skill. Or vice versa, people, if you did a physics undergrad, you might be really confident with physics, but then that exact same sort of interpretation skill or deduction skill or something like that, in a biology context, it'll just be like, no, I had no idea, I wasn't confident. So that's why that's important, because hopefully what we'll see is some patterns. You can then, was maths required? So it might be a chemistry question, but you had to do some multiplication in your head or something. And then you can just say, yes, it was a multiplication. Multiply, right? So you had to do whatever. Fill this out. The other thing, like I'm sort of trying to go quick just to save time, but the better quality your notes are as you're doing it, the more value you'll get from it when you're going back over your notes. So, fill out here, I had to multiply 2 numbers in my head or on paper, but they were, 4-digit numbers and there was 3 of them and I had to multiply them all together and it was hard. And, that was the math skill required, even though it was a chemistry question, that sort of thing. Better than notes. The next column is notes about what you were thinking and what your approach was. Here, just, if it's relatively simple, a 1-line or a few word answer. If it's a question that you thought about and you were stuck on for a while, write a paragraph if you want about what you were thinking and what you think the question wants you to do. And that's, again, really important, and I'll show you why in a second. And then the last column, notes concerns for barriers or, anything that you thought you didn't know that you needed to know in order to get through the question. And this is really good if you go and get shooting and stuff, because this column can often be picked apart, and you might write in here, I needed to know the acid base, or I needed to know the kinetic energy equation, and I just don't know it, and it wasn't in the stem. And then you can sit down, and when you go back and look through it, you might actually notice, oh wait, hold up, I didn't need the equation, because actually here it tells me that kinetic energy is related to mass and speed, and then down here it says it's related to the square of speed, and in the next paragraph it says it's half of the mass, and then you can extrapolate that the equation is actually kinetic energy equals half mv squared or whatever it is, but not because it gave you that equation, straight out, but because it implied the equation in the center. The other caveat, and we'll get onto the specific resources next, but the other caveat is that the ACER practice questions and even some of the like other commercially available questions, some of them are good and some of them are logic based, and some of them are still those like old style questions that the old Gamsat had more of, which did actually require knowledge. And so there are questions that come up in practice tests where you did need to know something prerequisitely, but it's okay to get those questions wrong, because if it genuinely had really high prerequisite knowledge, that's just a hangover from the old Gamsat, and it's not how it will actually be on the day. And you know, there's some good examples of that. I mainly studied with the ACER practice materials, and I was probably getting about 80% in section 3 before the day, because those tests came from 2008, I think they were published. But then on the day I got, you know, a 94 in my section 3, and that's because the 80% that I was getting right in the practice test were all the sort of logic and reasoning ones, and they were the ones that actually were in the exam on the day. Whereas the questions that had more prerequisite knowledge, I was getting wrong in the practice test, but weren't really representative of the Gamsat anymore. So hopefully that sort of makes sense as hopefully that makes sense in terms of how you should be writing down, or what you should be writing down as you're doing the questions. The other thing to then know is that because you're doing this, don't worry so much about the timing. Timing is really good to work on just before you sit the Gamsat or towards the end, but there's no point being quick if you're consistently wrong and worrying about your speed, but still getting it wrong and not getting better. So if you're preparing for the Gamsat with a couple of months out and you've got some time to sit down sort of every day for 2 hours or something, don't worry about the time yet. Worry about getting the questions right. Worry about learning the patterns and seeing what the logic and the thinking had to be, and then you can worry about speed at the end. And as you get more confident with getting better, you will the speed will sort of come with. So here's a really good example from a student that I tutored last year. She sat the Gamsat a few times, and then yeah, last year was the year that she sort of started taking this method, and she's now beginning med in February, which is really exciting for her, and you know, I think she can be a great doctor. But this is her her document that she used to send me when we would do tutoring. And so you can see here what we've done, or what she's done is just the questions from the specific book. So this is ACER Practice Test 3 questions, and then she's given it a confidence score. So for her, 5 was the highest confidence, 1 was the lowest confidence. So I'm in the middle. She's gone and color coded it after the fact. Green was where she got it wrong, red was where she got it right. She didn't always fill out the maths bit. If there wasn't a maths bit, you can just leave it as blank. But then she wrote what she thought she needed to do for the to get the question right, and then she also, where she did have barriers, wrote what they were. Admittedly, you know, I'd probably have liked to see more notes written in the barriers bit. You know, but it worked for her, and you know, as I think if you go back to the ones at the start, there were less notes, and as we got more into the process, there were more notes. But then what you do, so she's gone and she's written all these notes, and the only thing that's blank is this correct answer column. That's when you go and mark it. So you've sat the test, you've gone and done some questions, you now go and mark it. First thing you do is you put in the correct answers and you work out which ones are right and which ones are wrong. And that takes 5 minutes. But then what you need to do is you need to go and get the test up, and you need to get this document up, or get this piece of paper that you wrote this table out on up, and really go through each question, and you want to look at a few things. The first thing is, did you get it right or did you get it wrong? That one's obvious, and that's the one that everyone looks at when they're marking. But then the next question you need to ask yourself is, was I confident with my answer? And there's four possible outcomes with this sort of method of studying. One is that you get the answer right and you were confident. That's great. One is you get the answer right and you weren't confident. And what that kind of means is that you got it right, but a little bit of it was either luck because you guessed it, or you actually do know how to do it and you're just not confident in yourself with that style of question. And knowing that you're right and you weren't confident, and then going over it and being like, wait, I do know how to do this is a really important part of getting better. The next possible combination is getting it wrong and not being confident. So here, like this answer is wrong and it was a 2 confidence. And so that's okay because what's that saying is I didn't know how to do this question. So I kind of just, I wasn't confident. I gave it a crack and the answer's wrong. And then the scariest part, and that still happens a lot, and I would have a lot of them too. But the one that you really want to focus on too is when you're high confidence, so you've given it a 4 or you've given it a 5 for confidence, and then you've got the answer wrong, because you need to go and identify what did I do, what caught me out, and why was I so confident when I got it wrong? Because I need to kind of unlearn that skill. So let's go through an example from each one of those then. So here is a correct answer and a 4 confident, right? So relatively confident, got the answer right. So let's go to question 3, right? So whatever it's annoying, I can't show you what the questions were because there's a copyright thing, and YouTube and stuff is getting very good at detecting PDFs and stuff, and then ASA will tell the uni and say that I breached copyright. So I can't actually show you the questions, the ASA practice test. But for this question, the student got the answer correct and was relatively confident with it. So aortic regurgitation happens from the way, the way that blood flows is she sort of wrote down what she thinks the way that blood flows. Here's what I read from the diagram. I think that the diagram is telling me this answer, and therefore that's the answer that I wrote. Did I have any barriers? No, I didn't. This barrier one is blood crap. So that's good because what it means is that the skill here is really interpreting. Can you interpret a new or unfamiliar concept from a diagram? And in biology's context, for this question, yes, they could. And so you can now sort of sit there as you're looking over it and be like, okay, so I now know that the way that I approached this question when I approached it was correct. And that's a sort of a reasoning skill that was working for me. The next thing that you sort of will find, and you'll go through these questions sort of one by one down the page, and you look over them, and the closer you look over them to when you sat them, the better, because you'll then know what you'll then remember what you're actually thinking. But the next sort of question is something like this, where I got the answer, it was C, it was correct, but I wasn't very confident. I was a 2 out of 10. So now you want to go over how you approached it and really work out, was this a guess, or was this one of those cases where actually my reasoning was correct, I worked out the answer, and I didn't feel confident in myself even though I knew how to do it. So if it was a guess, you need to then go and work out, okay, so what was the answer to this question? It was correct. How do you work that out from the STEM? And then how could I have sort of back calculated that to get the answer? What were the reasoning skills that I actually needed here? Why didn't I feel like I was confident with those reasoning skills? Identify the skill, work out how it was meant to be applied, and then practice it. Call it out for what it is. Good. The other thing here is that, if you wrote some notes on why you weren't confident, like what would have been good here is more of a, what do you think, what else did you need to make yourself confident is really something that you should try and put in this, notes about barriers or concerns sort of column. Cool. So then the next one, which is pretty obvious, is that you have low confidence on an answer you got wrong. It's a guess. You need to go and work out what the question was asking. You've now got unlimited time, unlimited resources. You can Google it, you can YouTube it, you can whatever to try and work out these questions, but find out what was the reasoning. When you do that, you'll either work out, oh, actually, I had to go, like I genuinely had to go and know how to do, X, Y, Z biology from first year uni. Realistically, that's probably not a question that's going to come up in the Gamsat, but you might find that actually, oh, there was something, I just missed it in the STEM, and actually the way you answer it is to look at this, however. And that can be really tricky to work those ones out when you're by yourself. That's one of the benefits of, I guess, getting either like one option is to get a tutor if that's what you want to do, and you have the resources. But the other thing to do is just find 3 other people that are studying for the Gamsat. They can be your friends from uni or work or whatever, or you might not know anyone else studying the Gamsat. I didn't, but there's hundreds of Facebook groups or Reddit pages where people are all trying to do it, right? So if you have 3 friends or 4 friends and you all study in this exact same method with this exact same table, one of them is probably going to have got it right and knows why. And then that person can explain to your study group why that was correct, and sort of explain it. And then the next one will be one that you got right that they didn't get right, and you can explain it to them. So getting tutoring is a valid option if that's what you want to do and can afford, but don't feel like you have to go and spend $60 an hour on someone to teach you this when there's thousands of humans in the exact same spot as you trying to study for the Gamsat. And if you find 4 of them that are reasonably hardworking and want to take the same approach to you, that's the way to get around not having someone available to explain answers. And then the last sort of scary reason to get something wrong, for example, is like this one where it's a 4, confident, so pretty confident, but the answer's wrong. And so we can see that these, I can sort of tell for this practice one, that these notes were written after the fact because it's sort of like retrospectively saying should have done G1 phase or whatever. But yeah, try and write your notes as you're doing it and write, a couple of sentences if you're stuck, so that when you go back and look at it, you can kind of get that insight as to what you were thinking at the time and then work out why that was right or wrong. But really spend a lot of time on the ones that you were confident and got it wrong because you really want to work out what the reason was there. And so, yeah, the other thing too is just to try and make those notes as much about the reasoning and the sort of logic and the assumptions that you made and the deductions that you made and what you could infer from the STEM, rather than try and use existing knowledge. And the other thing that I say to people a lot during shooting is that if you have some existing knowledge that you were, a chemistry major in university, and then you go and sit the Gamsat, and there's the STEM telling you one thing, but you know that the boiling point of XYZ is actually XYZ, so you just use that in your brain, then you're putting yourself at risk because everyone else is going to be using the number in the STEM. So what I mean by that is just don't relying on your sort of pre-existing knowledge in whatever areas you can to sort of get ahead is great, because it makes you quicker, but don't get overconfident with your sort of background to the point where you're not reading the STEM. Cool. So then studying for Section 3 is really where you should spend a lot of your time if you're applying to most universities, because the Section 3 score is double weighted. So the first reason why is because Section 3 is times by 2, whereas the other ones weren't. But then the sort of the data science reason that you should be spending most of your time looking at Section 3 is that you can see from these sort of distributions again that Section 3 is the flat one. And so what that means is Section 3 is the one where it's relatively possible, as in 20% of people are scoring higher than 80 in Section 3, whereas that's just not true for Section 1. And so, you might not be there yet, but what we know is that it's possible to get up to those higher numbers in Section 3, whereas it's literally not possible by the looks of this. Assuming these people are all truthful in what they got, it's literally not possible to get a 90 or higher in Section 1, according to this 2,500 people, so a pretty big sample. So if you've got a 70 in section, or sorry, let's say you've got a 60 in Section 1, 60 in Section 2, and 60 in Section 3, you know, that might make you think, oh, I need to spend equal time on each section because they're all the same. But really, section three, you know, scoring a 60 means that you're, you know, sort of behind the middle of the curve. Whereas scoring a 60 in section one means you're sitting at the middle of the curve. So, really, relatively, section three is the one that you did the worst on if all three of the scores are the same. And you know, vice versa for anything else. Like if you got a really high section one, so you get a 70 in section one, you can, you know, sort of know that you're sitting really at the front of the pack for that, and that it's somewhere else that you need to focus on. So then how do you practice for so what do you use for practice? And my answer for section one and section three is the same. The only materials that I used were the ACER practice tests. That said, they're not perfect. They don't represent the Gamsat completely. But the reality is that nothing does. The Gamsat actual questions are used sort of in the modern era are kept really under lock and key from ACER, and you know, I haven't seen anywhere that they exist online or anything, or any sort of material that exactly replicates that. And so what it's just about is applying this method to those section three practice questions in the ACER one. If you run out of those questions, any of the other ones really do work. Like people I've tutored were using Desonils or whatever. Admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of like the Fraser ones. Desonil is relatively okay. There's a lot of assumed knowledge questions, but if you're okay at identifying which ones are assumed knowledge and which ones are reasoning, and then just not worrying about the assumed knowledge ones, that's okay. The other thing that I would draw your attention to is, at least in Australia, a lot of kids sit this test called ICAS when you're like in primary school. And then like at least in my high school, I've never heard of it again. But ICAS do actually do tests all the way up to year 12. And one of the tests that they do is science. So if you come onto the ICAS website, for example, sample test, this paper J is the year 12 level one. And these questions are really good at replicating the Gamsat because they are effectively just testing logic. So, you know, these are some sort of graph ones, and admittedly the 5 questions on the sample page are relatively easy compared to the Gamsat. But you know, these sorts of questions are really good. And so if you know, do have the resources to go and buy some practice tests, I believe you can get the past papers for the science ones. Here, it's the year 12 ones that you want. If you can't find, you know, I think they only ever sell like the media past year or something, but you know, I'm not going to go onto them because they're probably pirated or whatever, but there's definitely, you know, places that are relatively easy to access on the internet that have past ICAS papers. And so the Year 12 Science ICAS papers are really good at asking you questions that imply that you need to know science. Like this question here kind of makes you feel like you need to know chemistry, but you really don't to get it correct. So that's all I have to say for that. So that's section three. That's sort of the big one. Section one, then, how do you practice for that? And the answer is the exact same way. So you can go and do this exact same table, but instead of these, you know, you can just get rid of these three, right? But you really just want to be writing notes of what you think the question is asking you, what you were thinking when you answered it, why you picked the answer, and then what aren't you confident about, or what do you feel like you need to know or double check, or why, you know, what do you think you needed to know to do better? Write those down, go and mark it, and then spend a lot of time going back through those questions and working out what how you approached it, what the what the answer actually was, whether you were confident or not, what the paper needed you to do in order to be confident. And then, you know, keep doing that so that the next time you sit a similar question, you can get it right. So that's all I have to say about section 1 and 3. Section 2, then, obviously this sort of table method doesn't work, but what does work really well is just practicing coming up with essay plans. So writing the essays takes a long time, and if English is something that you struggle with, or articulating is something that you struggle with, and I don't mean that you're not a good speller, or you can't write a perfect gold star, you know, year 12 essay on the lighting of movies. But what I mean is, if you can, you know, comfortably and competently write sort of sentences which make sense, then that's all the writing skills you need to do section two. And then it's really about what you say rather than how you say it. Equally, there's a big pool of people that especially from just based on the people that have reached out for tutoring, that are either international students with English second language, or people that aren't as strong at English and writing, and for those people, I would say that's just a case of practice makes perfect, and writing out full essays is going to be the way to get better at English first, and once you're sort of relatively comfortable with sentence structure and stuff, go from there. But then once that's no longer your problem, it's really coming up with those ideas that's important. So if you go and find, and there's online places with lots of the stems and quotes, or online generators or whatever, but just, give yourself 5 minutes to simulate the time on the day with a piece of paper and a pen or a Word document, get your quotes, go and write up what your idea is, plan your essay, write, this is what my idea is, this is how I would structure it, here's the key thing that each paragraph would be about, and do that sort of essay plan, and then do another one, and do another one, and do another one, and do another one, and it should take you 5 minutes to do an essay plan, or less than 5 minutes, because you then would have to go and write it, and stop, and then move on to the next one. And if it takes 5 minutes per one, then you can punch out what is it, 12 per hour, and then at the end of that hour you've got 12 essay plans. And now take the time pressure off. There's no clock. Go sit down with those quotes and that essay plan and work out, was this a good idea? Would I have been able to execute it? Now that I'm reflecting on it, was there a better way? How could I have done it differently? And really just think about those quotes and what I was thinking about when I did this essay plan, and what did I miss? What didn't I see? How could I have done that better? Because yeah, it's really that planning and that idea creation that distinguishes where you sit on the curve. It's not, can you construct a sentence? Because if you can construct a really good literary Shakespearean sentence, that's no better than if you can, string two-syllable words together, if your idea is boring and out of touch and not interesting. And so, yeah, really just practicing that essay planning is really important. Um, so that's exactly how a first session of tutoring goes with me. Hopefully that is something that you find useful. If it is, and you and a couple of friends find that useful, I'd really encourage you to form sort of study groups where you all use that method, and then you can come back and sort of sit together and go through the questions. But just to reiterate some key points, it's really about reasoning. And you don't really need to go and hire a tutor for $60 an hour each week. You can sort of sit down with friends and spend time, but the way to get better is to spend more time going over the questions that you've done, and each time you're doing those questions, write some solid notes and write how confident you were, and then spend the time going over it and really being an active studier and actively working out how you can get better, rather than just passively sort of sitting there for hours grinding away on practice questions, taking that piece of paper, ticking it and crossing it, and then putting it in the bin and studying the next test, because that feels like you're working hard, and then you'll be frustrated when the Gamsat results come out if you don't do well. But it's quite a passive way of getting better. The last thing I would just say is that, normally, I tutor, and I'm one of those people that charges $6 an hour. I only have space really ever for two people, and often, a lot more than that reach out. So I don't really take people that reach out. Often it's just friends of friends. But if you did find this video useful, and you want to sort of buy me a coffee type thing, there is a link in the description that just you can put $5 or $10 down if that was something you found useful. If you think it's saved you that sort of hour of tutoring that would have cost $60 or whatnot, just because if this is a sort of a thing that helps a lot of people and is cheaper for a lot of people, and then is something that I can do instead of spending that one-on-one time with individual students. Instead, I can, make videos and sort of put them out into the world and help more people. That would be good. But yeah, pretty time poor and stuff with uni. And so just in terms of, losing the 2 hours it takes to prepare this video versus, that's 2 hours of tutoring that I could have done. So yeah, if you can support and you found this useful, that would be very much appreciated. If not, all good as well. And good luck for the Gamsat, and good luck for the future career in medicine.